in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Devos Outdoor, your go-to source for lightweight, portable, and versatile lighting solutions built for the outdoors and beyond. Whether you need scene lighting for public safety emergencies or reliable area lighting for your campsite, Devos has you covered. Their LED lanterns offer variable outputs and color options with Bluetooth remote controls that provide a complete ecosystem of lighting in a compact and easy-to-deploy package. These lights are perfect for camping, hunting, search and rescue, crime scene processing, and nighttime operations. Devos optimizes your experience and alleviates your pain points with extra power banks, solar panels, and more. Devos Outdoor ensures that you have long-lasting portable lighting no matter where you are. Check out their lineup at Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com or find them on Amazon. Again, that's Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com. This episode was also brought to you by Lowa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Lowa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Lowa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Lowa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Lowa Boots, L-O-W-A boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Lowa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there. So we've had some recent discussions at work about this program called the Five Voices. And you can Google this. It's a company or research firm, or I'm not actually sure. It was designed by a couple of people. They've written books on it. You can take it.
Is it like the five love languages?
It is very much like the five love languages, actually.
My love language is the taser.
It's yeah, exactly. There's an ass whooping. There's so I'm not actually sure like how to best. It is a leadership program, a communication, self-awareness, emotional intelligence program, and essentially there's a quiz that you can take, and it talks about what your leadership voice is, what your kind of style of communication is.
Mine, for example, is standing in front of cars. So that's good.
Yeah, about that. Not a great strategy, but here we are. But it's occurred to me that over the course of my career, there's been a number of times where I'm like, oh, we should do X, Y, and Z, and no one freaking listens. And then in 5 or 10 years, someone comes across and says it again. And I'm like, man, if only someone suggested that 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, but it was their idea, and therefore it was a good idea.
Suddenly it's a good idea. That's exactly that is my lived experience, 100%. And it's funny because this actually comes up in some of the Five Voices like lessons. And so I thought it was kind of fascinating, and it fits. And what it makes me think about when it comes to like self-awareness and emotional intelligence is understanding just where you fit in some categories like that is important. And understanding, there's like the good cop, bad cop sort of routine that people talk about mostly in the movies. It doesn't really play out in real life necessarily the way people describe it in the movies, but that's not to say it's not a thing on some level. But there is a time and a place where you need to like tap in or tap out, right? Like Jim and I are very different personalities, and I think we complement each other well in the context of this podcast when we have discussions because we have different worldviews, and I think they help each other out in a lot of ways. And in a similar sense, in a policing sense, the same thing happens. There's a guy that I want to handle certain kinds of problems, and then there's like a guy that I want. Sometimes you want like the pit bull, and then there's other times where you want the golden retriever or whatever, right?
I think this came up in a previous episode where you've got a guy who will just what is it? Kool-Aid man through the door. Don't you have that guy?
Pretty much. Absolutely. Yeah. Or the guy that will just piss everybody off. Like if you just need to like sort things out, I guess nature finds a way. But
my love language is Kool-Aid man.
Yeah. But the idea is like there is a time and a place where you got a guy, you call a guy, and then there's a time and place where you need to become the guy. You need to be the huck bearer or the huckleberry or whatever you want to call it. And sometimes at the very least, you want to know that, I have these tendencies, so I'm going to call a Jim or call a so-and-so to make sure, like, hey, can you just fact check me on this and make sure I'm not crazy, and at least run it by somebody, right? And in the context of law enforcement, you see this a lot when you think about things like the difference between the guardian and a warrior mindset. And there's all kinds of little archetypes of police officers. There's the crime fighter, and there's the peacekeeper and the enforcer and things like that. And we'll dive into that a little bit as we go, but I kind of want to understand where our personalities fit into the equation here.
So policing in general, and particularly in America, is tricky business. We're all about freedom here in this country, and that's a good thing. And we don't like being told what to do, because America. And the world has a long and really dark, scary history of excesses in the crime and punishment realm, right? Hangings, guillotines, nasty business. So we, Americans, hand policing powers over to the cops very grudgingly and very sparingly. Right? It is set up intention on purpose, but we do it. We do have policing power. So what makes a government, a state or the state, is the lawful and legitimate monopoly on violence. Violence is part of it. We formed a union under the Constitution, and that was part of the deal, right? We hand over force to a state and a federal government, and we agree not to shoot each other in the streets, right? I give up my piece of the violence pie and I outsource it, right? That's why I laugh a little when people joke about all the lawsuits in this country. Well, like, a lawsuit is a way to handle a disagreement without having to hold a duel. Southern Hamilton. So we, the people, delegate and outsource force to the government. That's the whole point, right? And sometimes we forget about that. Sometimes everyone all around this equation forgets about that, but you got to remember it. Like this, that is what government is force. But that also means that we, the people, need to be real careful about what we are telling the government to force people to do. Laws have force. When you say something like, there ought to be a law, what you're saying is you want a man or a woman with handcuffs and a gun to confront people and lock them in a cage if they don't comply. Right? Every fight a cop enters is inherently a gunfight because they got a gun on their hip, at least here in America, right? And there will be confrontations and people will get hurt. And sometimes people end up in cages who probably shouldn't. And it would be great if everyone just complied with police commands. But we've now seen a lot of videos where police give conflicting or nonsensical commands. Put your hands up, crawl to me. Get out of the car.
Don't move,
stay
show
where
me
you
your
are.
hands.
Don't move.
Yeah.
Don't move, show me your hands. Okay? And it would be great if police were perfect. But they are humans. Imperfect servants interacting with other humans who are often even more imperfect. Right? There's a natural tension here.
So we're going to dig into this guy named Bittner in a little bit. He was a psychiatrist, I'm not sure which. Sociologist, there you go. That's actually the right. Couldn't remember off the top of my head there. But one of the things that he describes about the role of policing, and a lot of his research happened in like the late 60s and 70s, he talks very specifically about the role of policing as not necessarily about enforcing laws or rules, but really about the authorization to apply coercive force at their own discretion in situations that demand immediate resolution. And that has that's a big factor of like the timing of it. At 2:00 in the morning, we can't call a judge. We can't go to court. We can't let the lawyers sort it out. And so you need the police for that. And it's not necessarily about enforcing the rules. It's about using some judgment. And really where this gets into is discretion. All of the things that Jim is talking about is interesting to think about. If you think about what's going on in Iran right now and the civil unrest occurring there, one of the things that has occurred to me is there's a lot of people who are getting, I don't know, supposedly the executions were stayed or something, but so maybe they're not getting executed. I don't know.
Oh, there were definitely people just machine gunned in the streets.
For sure people were,
yeah.
but apparently it stopped or the hangings didn't occur or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, allegedly. I don't know. But like for voicing their disobedience and essentially those things are being characterized as crimes against God or something, right? There's these images coming out, and who knows if they're real or not, of women burning their face coverings and stuff in the street and all of these things. And these are like a big deal in Iran. This stuff is like, it's crazy if you think about how good we really have it in America in terms of what we think is our rights being infringed upon versus in some places how crazy it can be. But it highlights how big of a responsibility we have in law enforcement as the people with that coercive power that Bittner describes, right? And it's also important to notice in law enforcement our role as political pawns. At the end of the day, we are a political tool, whether we like it or not. And a lot of police officers, I think, haven't wrapped their head around the fact that, they're not just about the good and the evil, because they're the laws that are written by the people in power. And essentially that makes us a political tool, right? So it's easy to kind of like detach yourself from that and say like, oh, well, I didn't write the laws, I just enforce it, but you still have to recognize you're a political tool at the end of the day.
And you can see how inherently problematic that is. The just following orders thing, and that'll come up as we go.
Yes. Yeah. And it's an important discussion about the morality and the ethics, and not just the legal stuff, but also the oath that we swore and the people that we swear the oath to, and our sense of discretion. And one thing that I think is important to point out when it comes to being political tools is the classes that write those laws that we enforce. And I'll just throw an example out there of equipment violations on cars. Right? If you think about the people who can afford a nice new car and everything works really well, they're probably not going to have any problems with their brake lights or their tail lights or their headlights or anything like that falling apart. But the people who have more trouble or difficulty affording nicer things and keeping a job and feeding the mouths in their household, right? Those people struggle with those sorts of things. And the laws are not necessarily written to support those people. In fact, arguably, they're probably making it more difficult for those people than they are for the people that can afford it well. So if you think about kind of the big picture in terms of policing and our responsibility and oath, this stuff is really important because the state of civil affairs in 2026 is getting a little weird for those not paying attention. And I think it's important. I talk about the personalities of police officers, but also to understand in the grand scheme of things where we fit into all of that.
Yeah. So there was this dude Mike mentioned named Egon Bittner. The only other time I've heard Egon was Ghostbusters, but this Egon Bittner,
which is awesome.
He was a Jewish Holocaust survivor. So he was on the receiving end of just following orders, right? And he immigrated to the United States and studied sociology, mostly out in California, UCLA, I believe he did most of his studies at. And Brandeis, I think also on the education front. I think he was a professor there. And he particularly explored the relationship between police and society.
There was one of his big works had to do with the way we view mental health crises as criminal acts. And it's kind of an interesting way of looking at things. Like, where did it become, where and how did society draw the line between like, oh, that guy is just troubled, you know, he's mentally ill, and like, oh, it's a crime. And to Jim's point earlier, we need people with guns to go handle that problem and not medical professionals. So he gets a lot into that kind of work. And super fascinating if you think about a guy who went through elements of the Holocaust, getting into the realm of policing and the government role of using force and coercion to compel people to do things.
Yeah, there's some wild history there. Like, you think about how even America handled very troubled people 100 years ago. The cutting edge of psych technology was lobotomy.
Yeah. And that wasn't that long ago, honestly.
No.
Like, really kind of crazy. So one of the things that he wrote around 1970, he talked about the functions of police in modern society. And I already kind of mentioned this, right? Not necessarily about law enforcement or crime control, but about coercive force at their discretion in situations that demand immediate resolution. And I think this is really important for a couple of reasons. One is this was published in 1970, so we're talking over 50 years ago, right? This is nothing new. Two, it doesn't necessarily matter at the end of the day what the quote unquote law is. It's all about restoring peace and order in the moment, right? In the middle of the night, or in whatever, it's really boils down to kind of problem solving, if you think about it, right?
And discretion. And it's funny when police have discretion, when they don't, when they have it, but they pretend like they don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that he talks about is the police are a mechanism for the distribution of situationally justified force in society. And when he talks about the types of personalities, now to be clear, when I get into the little like archetypes, personality types of police officers, this is not something specific that he wrote. That doesn't actually come, no one wrote some list of those. It's just something that's kind of come out of a variety of sources, and we'll talk about some of those. But one of the things that he describes when he talks about some of the tensions that come between law enforcement and the people, as it were, it really refers to some unavoidable tensions. And one of the things that I saw that really helps kind of sum this up is that the police are expected to act decisively while remaining legitimate, to exercise discretion while appearing rule-bound, and to resolve immediate problems without creating long-term disorder. And he emphasizes that these tensions are not failures of character or training. They are intrinsic to the role itself. And I think this is really important because if you dig into it a little bit deeper, you'll find that when you look into these archetypes or these personality types of cops that I'll describe, he talks about these tensions as adaptive, right? These are products of the job that we have to do.
I think it's worth restating them, what the tensions are. Can you say it again, Mike?
Yeah. The police are expected to act decisively while remaining legitimate. Now, if you think about, to kind of break that down a little bit, it means that we have to do things sometimes that might seem hasty or abrupt, but also keep the people happy, right? We need to earn the public trust. In other words, we need the public's consent to use force against people. So police are expected to act decisively while remaining legitimate, to exercise discretion while appearing rule-bound. In other words, there are laws and there are rules, and we have to apply those, quote-unquote, fairly, but also use discretion, which means sometimes we apply them and sometimes we don't. There's a careful dichotomy there. And to resolve immediate problems without creating long-term disorder. Solve the problem at 2:00 in the morning, but understand that you are innocent until proven guilty at the end of the day, right? But he talks about how these responses are adaptive to those tensions, right? The officer who emphasizes force readiness over legitimacy becomes easily recognizable as that warrior type.
The Punisher skull guys, the sheepdogs.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's adaptive, right? It's all about like the force, the need to use force, the intrinsic, like it's inevitable that you will have to use force. And if you are so ready to use force that you don't care what anyone thinks about it because, gosh darn it, I am in charge and we are the sheepdogs or the punishers or the whatever, right? You become kind of that warrior type. Alternatively, the officer who recognizes consent and restraint are important elements of his job can be more of that guardian type, the guardian versus warrior type. Now, again, these are not Bittner's words, but if you think about the things that he describes, you can apply it in that context. That a lot of the reasons that we become the way that we are as police officers, as a guardian or a warrior or whatever, they are adaptive responses. It's a response of what the job requires of us, right? It's not a failure of character or training. It's part of the job. So there are others that come out of this discussion related to things like discretion, right? Do we rigidly apply rules? Well, you're 5 over in a school zone, and so you're getting a ticket, versus like, all right, can I reason with this person? Can I adapt his behavior without writing him a ticket? Do I have to write him a ticket, right? Some people are very, very rule-oriented, rule enforcement-oriented, right? I'm looking at you traffic guys.
I was pulled over going 38 and a 35 once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah.
Some people withdraw emotionally and become more cynical. And they just have this view of the world of like, people are just inherently careless and don't care and, whatever. And I'm the only one that keeps order and, all of these things. And so they kind of take their emotions out of it and they're just very cynical. They just don't believe in the good of people. And that can look a certain way among police officers. And some people can become very pragmatic, sometimes to a fault. By experience, at the end of the day, all they're trying to do is just get home. Like, hey man, this job is sketchy. I don't really care. I'm not trying to get through. I don't need any more trouble. I don't need to go stir shit up. I just need to make it from 9 to 5 or from 2100 to 0700 or whatever it is, whatever your hours work to survive another day and make it to retirement. And that's all I'm trying to do, right? But again, the important part of it is it's an adaptation to what the role requires of us. And I think that's an important conversation. So the guardian versus warrior thing is like an easy part of the debate, right? And a lot of people have like what's so wrong with warrior? And it's like, well, we're not fighting wars against our own people. And so there is a distinction to be drawn there. And then the guardians, to some people, feel a little too soft because sometimes there are a lot more... I think what can be best described as like counterterrorism type roles that you may have to play. And you need a quote unquote warrior mindset to deal with that kind of problem, perhaps, right? And that's fair if the sticker is really what motivates you and you need the Instagram label of a warrior and you can't distinguish that in your mind. I understand that on some juvenile level, you really need to embrace the difference between warrior and guardian. I think that's kind of dumb, but
and there nuance matters here, right? There are definitely days I need you to be able to turn that on.
For sure.
And if that is what keeps you alive when someone has already shot you, then
fine.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Right. If that gets you through the PT test is you got to jack yourself up on, white monsters and tattoos and oorah. I get it. I've been there. Right. Yeah. I understand. Yeah. But if that is your entire personality and you're a peace officer in a Seattle, Washington, you're going to have a rough time.
Emphasis
right?
on peace.
Yeah. So, and we as a society honestly don't love that, right? Because of our history, we don't want to feel like we're at war with the cops.
And so that's the point of this is I need you to understand the distinction.
Yeah.
Right? Warrior versus guardian is a great place to start. there's a time and a place, but I need you to understand that there's a distinction.
Yeah. So, I've mentioned before, I think on the podcast, that pilots like fancy watches. And the reason pilots like fancy watches is because we'd rather interact with our watch than with you, right? We like machines. We'd rather interact with machines than with people. And we actually have to get formal training in how to work with a team in our cockpit or in our formation. The technical term for that is crew resource management, CRM, or cockpit resource management. Some of that is like the mechanics of like, how do we challenge in response to a checklist? You know, landing gear down, indicators check, pilot, co-pilot, whatever, right? Or how we, verify clearance to land, clearance to drop ordnance, that kind of thing. But a lot of it is like, hey, listen to people when they tell you things and try not to be a dick. That's a big part of CRM.
Seriously.
And
let the crazy guy talk is one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, and it's basic human relations training, like you might find in a management class or in an office space. A lot of those trainings talk about personality types you're going to find. Like you might have heard of the Myers-Briggs test, the ESTJ or INSF or
Elemental
that
P.
kind of thing. Elemental P. Some of those can be useful in helping you develop some self-awareness and social awareness, which you probably need. You just have to be careful about overdoing it, right? You don't make it your whole personality. I like to joke that those personality tests are like horoscopes for people who shop at Target and have degrees. Right?
Yeah. So the thing I mentioned earlier about the 5 voices assessment, and again, you can Google it, you can read the books, you could take the workshops, whatever. I don't represent them. We are not endorsed or sponsored by them in any sense. It's just an analogy that kind of relates to all of this. Some of that is based on, according to their website, the Myers-Briggs tests, right? Like the personality stuff.
It rhymes a lot.
Specifically, right? And it has to do with your communication and leadership style. And we all have got that, right? And it's also important to note, kind of like Jim is saying, like you can take anything too far. It's important to note that you don't have only one voice. You have some combination of the 5. And like, if you were to read some of their literature, you would learn that you've got like a go-to standard voice that feels very comfortable. You've got one that you kind of got to work at. You've got one that's like a blind spot. Then you got one that's like a nemesis. And I have noticed that there have been times over the course of my career, like I said in the beginning, where I like have an idea and I voice that to someone and they're like, yeah, but. They've got a bunch of yeah, buts. And they get in the way and it's like, all right. And I kind of throw my hands up and I feel like no one's listening. And then someone else says it a different way, maybe, or the right timing, maybe.
But the funny thing is those yeah buts to them, that's their love language. That's them trying to help you.
Yeah.
Right?
They're doing their due diligence.
Yeah.
And they're also trying to keep people grounded. And they're also trying to make sure they're maybe a little risk averse. They're trying to do what's safe, what's comfortable.
They're trying to protect you or protect the organization.
100%.
But it feels very much like they're trying to attack you.
Yeah. And I was in a conversation with someone recently who expressed some frustrations about dealing with someone with a different style than they had. And what I explained to them was like, hey, look, that's just their voice. And those two voices can be compatible if they know how to work with each other, right? And so this is kind of where this comes into play, right? The archetypes or the personality types of our profession, and there's military ones too. I'm not as familiar with those as Jim might be, but like within law enforcement, like I said earlier, no one has written some definitive list. These are just kind of things that have emerged over time. But the framework for them and the way people describe them comes from legitimate research. The thing that's interesting is that the research comes from like the 60s and 70s. So I'm going to tap into some of those just a little bit. I mentioned this guy Bittner. He talks about some of that in terms of the tensions and how those manifest. And I've got some more on that a little bit later. But just to kind of talk about, we mentioned the guardian versus the warrior, I think is a big thing to to think about.
Mike, just to be clear, are we talking about the voices? Do you want to list out the voices and then separately list out the archetypes?
No, our list. You guys can Google the voices, the 5 voices thing. It is a valuable leadership communication group dynamics tool. It's a good self-awareness, emotional intelligence.
We'll link to
tool,
them in the show notes,
and you can check it out. I'm here for it. I like it. Maybe we'll get someone from that organization on someday, but it was more kind of the analogy of like how that relates to this, right?
Got it. Okay.
So you've got like the guardian warrior type. We talked about that. I mentioned the enforcer. Some people just are like, the rules are the rules, and they're kind of OCD, and we know those people. They're very
love those people. Love them.
They're very organized. They're very anal, right? But when you meet the cop that's like that, you could be like, you're probably a traffic guy, aren't you? Right? And the thing is like, we need people like that too sometimes, right? It's okay. The crime fighter, right? I just want to take bad guys off the street. I'm out there kicking up dust and stirring stuff up, and it's not about like I can let a lot of rules slide as long as I can get, the troublemakers out of society. That's what they're after, right?
And there's obvious pitfalls with each of these, right?
Absolutely. And we're not here to necessarily deep dive each of them so much as talk about sort of where they come from and to understand we all fit into kind of one of these categories, but we have to appreciate all of them, right? Not just ours.
Yeah.
That our worldview is not the only worldview, right? And how I described this to Jim when we were talking about this is, I know, I like to go catch bad guys. When you have someone run from the police or hide from the police, I'm happy to be your guy, right? I'm probably not the dude that's gonna like go find your wanted person on my instincts and whim and investigative prowess. I'm not that. If someone says like, oh, this guy ran from the police and he's hiding in a neighborhood, by all means, but it's a different game, right? If a carjacking happens or there's a drive-by shooting and you're looking for the car, I'm probably not going to be the guy that finds the car, but I know the guy that's going to find the car, and I'm going to go follow him around. Right? I'm not as good at that, but once we find it, game on. Different story, right? So you got the crime fighter, you got the old guy, the cynic, the guy that's burnt out, right, and just doesn't give a fuck, doesn't want to be there. We all know that guy, right? We've got the power seeker, the ego types, right? Do you feel in charge, right? The guy that goes to the calls and he really just wants to throw his weight around, and he's just kind of like, what's the problem? I'm going to solve all your problems. I have all the answers, right? The very ego kind of driven guy. Now, again, that can be very useful and pragmatic in certain contexts, right? You go to the bar fight, you go to the fight at the bar, you need a guy that can go in there and be loud and be like, everyone shut the fuck up and sit down. That can be very useful. It can also become a huge unnecessary problem in certain settings. Right?
Kool-Aid man.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
That's a great, So the power seeker, the ego guy, that's a problem. And then I mentioned the pragmatic guy who just wants to get through the end of his shift. And there's also like the really professional problem solver type. The type that's just always level-headed and calm. He knows when to pick and choose his battles. He's probably not going to be your crime fighter. He's not going to use the technicality to try to stop everything that moves. He's not going to use the Stretch Armstrong technique to try to, get into people's cars and pockets. But if you get him on scene of like a dispute of some form, he will probably make peace happen and resolve things calmly, right? The professional type. So again, not a definitive list, not an all-inclusive list, but just to give you some ideas, if you've worked in policing long enough, you've probably seen each of those types in some form or another.
I like that. So anytime we talk about categories of people, we are doing a couple of tricky things. One, we are generalizing and modeling. All models are flawed. Some models are useful. Not everyone will fit neatly into any given category, and people might move from category to category in the course of a career or even in the course of a shift. We have a saying in my job that you are whoever America needs you to be that day.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need you to shut the hell up and color. Sometimes we need you to key the mic and take a stand. And that might shift over the course of an hour, right? There are days when I absolutely want my cops to be warriors. When the shitbag is roaming through my kid's school with an automatic rifle and a gym bag full of pipe bombs,
Get some.
I want you to put your ass kicking pants on and go deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay? But when my mom calls the police because she got caught up in a phone scam, I need you to be doing some professional guardian work, right? You go in warrior, like whose ass you gonna kick? My mom's? Like, what are you gonna do, right? So based on what I have heard and seen from Mike, what I've seen on the ride-alongs with him and stuff, is that requirement to shift gears, to meet the moment, is a really critical skill in policing. And it should absolutely be a trait that we select for and that we polish in training. The ability to shift gears, that is a crucial skill in policing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really hard. It's one of those abstract intangibles that's hard to screen and select for. But the best cops I know are able to turn it on and turn it off exactly like Jim is saying, right? So some historical context. We talked about Bittner and how he describes the tension. And I think some of the roles come out of that, but he doesn't necessarily get into the roles so much. But there was a guy named James Q. Wilson in 1968 who did talk about the varieties of police behavior. And so he did kind of get into the styles of policing. And he talked about the watchmen, the legalistic, and the service-oriented types, right? The watchmen are the ones who are there to maintain order. The legalistic are more about enforcing the rules and laws. And the service-oriented ones are about problem solving for the community, right? So I think you can see some trends that come out of those styles of policing. The watchmen, the legalistic types, and the service types. There's also a guy named Jerome Skolnick, 1966. He talked about the working personality of police. And the personality, he called it a working personality. I think this is relevant because, again, it's that adaptations to the workplace piece.
And also you're in a role. You know, I hate to talk about the 60s and psych without talking about the Stanford prison study, right? People fall into roles.
Yes. Google that if you're not familiar. Stanford Prison Experiment. There's also what's the other one?
Milgram.
Milgram's Experiment.
Yeah.
But I think it's relevant, right? So the adaptations or the working personality of the police is all about adaptations to the workplace, right? Being in constant danger, or at least perceived constant danger, or the possibility of danger, and being in a position of authority leads to a shared worldview among police officers. You couple that with things like being in a constant state of suspicion. No one is telling me the truth. I have to be a truth or fact finder, right? So I have to be suspicious of people. And then the solidarity that comes with working with people who have been vetted or I believe to be the good guys. And if not the bad guys, at least the unknown guys. That being situated in that way will lead to adaptations that will absolutely give us our own kind of personality. And I can see why cops would be like, it's like, oh, that guy's probably a cop because he acts like a cop. And most of us, again, know there's different types of cops. I don't have the wit or personality, I'm too socially awkward to ever be really good at undercover work, for example. The guys that I know that are good at undercover work are really freaking good at undercover work. And it's a gift that they have, right? And a lot of that is an adaptation to perhaps how they grew up, the environments that they were raised in. And at some point they hit that fork in the road where I'm like, I'm not going to go down that path. I'm going to go down this path. I'm going to be one of the good guys. But it gives them something. Right? There's some adaptation that they have. So these things that were published back in like the 60s and 70s kind of inform what we see in police officers nowadays. And if you think about like post 9/11, ever since 2001, when the global war on terror started after the attacks here, and not only the mentality that came with that for a lot of us who grew up in that era, but also all the guys that went to the military and served and then got out and then needed a job and ended up in policing, or they started training police officers in some way or another. It all kind of bleeds over. But this stuff was starting to get tapped into 50 plus years ago, 60 years ago. I think that's important to note.
Right as LSD was making its rounds, importantly.
Yeah. There's another, when I talk about the cynic and the burnout, I do want to hit kind of another subgroup, as it were, which is your like retired on duty guys who have no more fucks to give. And you thought maybe they were police officers once upon a time, but they certainly don't act like it these days.
Yeah, in the military, we call it ROAD, retired on active duty, ROAD, where the guy's just collecting a paycheck and he's trying to be invisible.
Yeah. I think this is a person who you need to pay attention to, because a lot of times we forget what kind of things that they've been through and what kinds of things they've experienced. And particularly when it comes to that adaptive pressure that we discuss here, our kind of personality type, I guess, can evolve over time, over the course of our career, right? Some of that can be related to things like department policy, and some of it is just timing in society.
I'll give you an example from my own life. In my time in the military, I've faced 3 sets of layoffs, 3 sets of reductions in force. And one of those times I was in Afghanistan when they passed the notification. So they're like, yeah, well, we're probably not going to fire you while you're here. We'll wait till you get home. And
Perfect.
That was a formative experience for me. When you consider the amount of institutional loyalty you're expected to have to your service, and then your service is like, yeah, but maybe not you. That changes how you look at it. That changes how you look at the relationship, the contract between you and your employer. And you start to realize that, like, you're there at your employer's convenience.
Yeah.
And similarly, a lot of my bros saw that and said, okay, cool. I'm going to go fly for Delta Airlines, Southwest Airlines, American Airlines, FedEx, UPS, whatever. And the Air Force still can't quite figure out why that happened.
Weird.
Well, weird.
Yeah.
As far as policy goes, on the military side, often this will happen with the 20-year pension, right? So at 17 years, guys are like, well, the best thing I can do is keep my head down, right? And I'm curious how that's going to change now that we've adjusted the retirement to what's called the BRS, the blended retirement system. We don't know yet exactly how that's going to affect it, but it's coming up here real quick. This can also happen with promotions in the military. So when you get promoted, you have to stay in that higher rank for 3 years for it to count in your pension. It's called High 3. So I've seen guys get promoted and then like kind of check out, which is interesting because you typically would expect those guys to be like the more energetic guys, but they're adapting to a situation.
Yeah. So a lot of this goes back to that the adaptive tensions thing that forces people to kind of change over time, right? And if you think about the things that can weigh into this in a post-Ferguson world, I specifically recall when body cameras became a thing in law enforcement, when the Police Executive Research Forum and the whole like pillars of policing, all this stuff started coming out saying this is what cops should do in, this era of policing. There was a lot of development that happened that some people were able to adapt to and some were not. And if you think about like the kids these days come into policing, go through the academy, they're indoctrinated into what is now the new normal. And it's not only is it a different generation coming into that era of policing, but we're also teaching and training people a different way. There was a period there where guys with, 5, 10, 15 years on, 20 years on, had to either adapt or get out. And some people stuck around, and that's some of your retired on duty people are like, yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing here. And it's kind of tough, right? And there are people who like kind of adapted or like at least played along like they adapted, but they're honestly a little sketchy to be around. Like they're really reluctant to be around the body-worn cameras. And I think most in 2026, everyone's on board with like, I wouldn't ever want to do this job again. I did this job without a body camera. Fuck that. Give me the camera. Like the camera has been nothing but helpful to me. If that, like, do you know how much shorter my reports get now that I have a camera? I'm just like, play the tape. Honestly, like, you don't take my word for it. Watch the tape.
Roll that footage.
Yeah, you want to see what this motherfucker said to me? Like, go ahead. But some of the societal pressure, right? The legal stuff that's changed over the years and the policies that have come with it have pushed people to change. And there have been people who have not done well with that. But I think it's important that we consider those adaptive tensions that will drive some of this, right? And Jim has talked a lot about the difference between the climate and the weather. And I just think it's important to consider the environment that we are policing in this era. And particularly because right this minute, things are a little tense in the world of policing.
As we record this, I think today there was a second shooting in Minnesota between ICE or ICE affiliates and protesters. So
yeah, so just
exciting times.
So just think about how all of that and the policy changes that come with it will drive some of this. And I think even just policy changes that are, from state to state, we have changes in retirement stuff, right? That can affect people's decisions to stay on duty a little bit longer than they should. Sometimes we just have things like someone gets in trouble for something stupid. It doesn't have to be a big national blunder or anything like that. It could just be, that policy is named after, Bob.
The mic rule.
The mic rule, yeah. Like, it doesn't take much for like someone to have some thing that comes up and suddenly we have a thing. But those policies can drive a lot of it too, and that can affect people. And I think it's important that we have some empathy for like, they've got their own worldview and their perspective. It doesn't mean they don't have something to bring to the table. So all that being said, one of the other things that I stole from the Five Voices thing, and again, not taking their work, this is kind of my own interpretation of it, but I think it's important, which is to recognize when we consider our personalities and our roles in policing or whatever field that we're in, there's always an ongoing debate about nature versus nurture. And I think it's pretty well established that there's a little bit of both, right? There certainly are predispositions to be spoken for in terms of our nature and our types. And a lot of that comes from our upbringing. So there's a nurturing argument to that as well. But then also our environments will help shape some of it.
Yeah. And there's like the true psych version of nature nurture, which is your biological wiring versus your upbringing. And then there's like the training version of that, which is how people are when they show up day one to training and then what you can do about them, right? Those are related but distinct.
Well, and to Jim's point earlier about how we select people, what nature of people are we selecting, right? You can also go further into the weeds in that sense. But there's an important third element in the nature versus nurture discussion, and that is the choice, right? And so one thing that in my context as a guy on a SWAT team, for example, is we can debate until the cows come home about whether it's our nature or certain things that were nurtured in us that make us uniquely fitted for a tactical team. But one important characteristic that we all have in common is that we all made the choice at the end of the day to sign up, take the test, show up to the school, go through the selection process, get on the team, remain on the team, and then grind every day that the calls come out, every training day that we go and we deal with the fucking summer heat on the range and the stupid gear and the stupid gas mask and the stupid. All the things that we do, we are still making a choice. And when it comes to our personality types.
Real quick, I just want to talk real quick about the personality that is living in Arizona, because there's an adaptation to living in Arizona. I used to live in Arizona, right? I was stationed in southern Arizona, and I remember there was a Geico ad that was tailored to people in Arizona, right? It was target marketed, and it said, "Look, people in Arizona don't have time to argue about insurance. It's so freaking hot there, they'll explode." Right? It's 169 degrees every day.
Yeah, just fucking get on with it.
Yeah.
That's fair. But the choice is important, because if we consider that we all have a personality type or a voice, if you will, we all have our things that are natural and our tendencies and the things that we have to work towards, there is still an element of choice. We do still have some control over the type of person that we want to show up as in a certain situation, right? So if you're the warrior type or the ego type or the rule enforcer type, and that's just your nature, and you've been nurtured into, and when I say that, right, traffic guys are often, they're tracking stats. That's how they're, a lot of times they're working on grant money that gets rewarded based on performance, and they're going to keep giving the money to where the performance is. And it's not about quotas necessarily, but it's more about evaluations, right? It's more about like, oh, well, this guy's producing, right? There's not a minimum number, but this guy's better than that guy, right? So
it sounds like a quota to me.
That's the thing, right? It's all like however you want to describe it. But the whole point is you can be that guy, and that could be nurtured in you. It could be part of your nature, and you could also be nurtured, but you can also stop someone and not be a dick because you make the choice to not be a dick. Right?
So next time I get pulled over, I want to be like, who hurt you in your childhood?
Yeah. Tell me about
the last time I got pulled over by a state trooper, and I'm obviously very, very pro cop, and obviously very careful with how interactions go. I got him cussing me out as he was walking back to his car. I'm like, yes.
That doesn't surprise me.
But consider, and I think every cop I've ever met really understands this, that you are, as a cop, you are where people interact with the government and in a frictiony way.
Yeah. Like the only more adversarial member of government is probably like the DMV or the IRS.
Depending on the day, and most often it's you, right?
Yeah,
like
for sure.
And that's part of the game, and you have to adapt to it, and you're gonna end up in in some personality, right?
Well, and my whole point is to not ever forget that you have a choice.
Yeah.
And to not just be the way that you are. I'm not saying you shouldn't just accept that on some level, but you should also have the self-awareness to be like, well, these are my tendencies, and recognize that I'm predisposed to do certain things, and have that like open mind to say like, all right, should I stick with my default answer here? Or should I just, go on autopilot and not give any deliberate thought to anything I ever do? Be intentional, be mindful, be present is kind of the lesson in some of that, right? That you have a choice.
Speaking of choice and being retired on active duty or burned out, a mentor pilot of mine back in the day used to say, you need to stop flying when it stops scaring you. And that sounds kind of poetic or whatever, like a movie quote, but it's real. And you need to read yourself enough to know when you are past the point of being a safe and productive member of the organization. And nobody really wants to think like that, right? Like, you know, the same grit that got you the job and the same grit that got you through 10, 15 years of it is going to keep you at it well past when you really should stop doing it. And please don't put your team in the position where they're the ones who have to pull you out, or your boss is in a position where he has to sit you down, right? When you realize you need to not be there, you have to be the professional who says, I need to not be here anymore.
And this, you can apply this in so many different ways, right? I think a big part of this is just maturity. When we're young and we're cocky and we're, you know, having fun, our hair's on fire, it's easy to be just kind of like running with it. And hell yeah, you know, I'm having a great time. New pilot, new cop, new whatever. But that self-awareness arc, I mean, I mentioned the conversations that I've had over the years where like, oh, I had this idea and I voiced it and I got blown off or ignored, and then someone else said it and it was their idea. And so it got, you know, the self-awareness and the maturity part of this is to say, okay, well, maybe that's on me. Like maybe that was my ability to communicate it. Maybe I didn't time that well. Maybe I didn't articulate that well. Maybe I didn't, right? And so with that comes the maturity to say like, hey boss, I'm not 100% today. And I'll give you an example. Dog handlers tend to be very like possessive, right? Like they want the action, they want the control, like send me in, fuck all you guys, right? They're kind of maverick in that sense. And not to say they can't be team players, but they do kind of want to be the center of attention. Like everything's about the dog at times. And I know this, I'm a dog handler. It takes a lot for a dog handler to say, hey, I want to do this, but my dog, like I have a newer dog maybe, or an inexperienced dog, or this is not my dog's strength. This other dog might be, like someone else might be a better fit for this. And there's a guy, I remember several years ago, it was our head trainer. He was our most experienced senior canine guy. But he had a new dog at the time. And we were going to send him into this building search scenario that his dog, he was like, I don't know if he's ready for that. And he had me take my more experienced dog in. And it's just because he had gotten a new dog, right? And he tapped me in. And talk about maturity. That's one of those things that you have to be able to, like, again, what makes us good at our jobs sometimes is that we're willing to like take those risks, or that we're willing to make those calls, or like sometimes the ego is, or the confidence, whatever, is what we need. But there also has to be that like second voice where you got to go like, hold on a second, maybe there's a better way to do this. And that's kind of like the important part of the self-awareness piece, where he goes, hey, like, I think we should probably not use my dog for this. And my dog got the action on that, right? My dog got to save the day, but it's all because he had the maturity and the self-awareness to do that. And so I think a big part of this discussion in terms of like personality types in your career field is to appreciate and understand where you sit in the team. And it's also to understand that a big part of synergy, if I was to go with the canine angle here, to recognize that as a dog team, what we bring to the table is a good example of synergy. How does the sum of two things add up to something greater than its parts? Well, it's because I recognize the strengths that I bring as a human and what the dog brings. A dog without a handler doesn't do shit, right? He doesn't have the executive function, the intelligence, cognition that humans do. So I can use his sense of smell and his drive and instincts to do things for me. And that's what makes us a good team. That's what makes us an asset. It's what makes us valuable.
And a handler without a dog will probably, lick his own balls or whatever it is he does.
If he could, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But in the sense of a canine team, appreciating that we bring different things to the table, that the two members of that team bring individual unique strengths and capabilities to the table is what brings that synergy, right? You need the diversity in the teams, right? So in some teams, like you can play the good cop, bad cop thing. And there's a time and a place where it's like, all right, I'm going to call Jim in for this. I'm going to have Jim talk. To be honest with you, Jim and I have done this 1,000 times with different interviews and interactions with people. This is a good Jim conversation to have. This is a good Mike conversation to have, right? There are times and places that we might jive, and we know that. I know that I'm not going to go as well with that guy as Jim might, right? Same thing happens in the law enforcement realm. And then there's times where it's like, well, I don't have someone to lean on in that situation, but I need to become that. I need to be the chameleon, right? That can adapt and be like, hey, I'm not a hostage negotiator, but I need to pretend to be one today.
Exactly.
I might be the tactical guy, but today, guess what? I'm going to be the guy you need me to be, And it's because I have the maturity and the self-awareness and the whatever it takes to be that, right? I have to be a dynamic, capable teammate in that sense.
Yeah, a couple things real quick is one, the term diversity is this weird contentious thing in 2026, right? DEI, whatever. That is whatever it is. You need a mix of personalities on a team. And it's very tempting when you're hiring a team to like try to clone yourself or try to clone some other guy on the team. Oh, that guy, he's really, really good. We want more of him. That's cool, but you got to have a mix, right? You have to have the guys who are a little bit ADHD, who are going to bounce around from topic to topic. And you have to have the guys who are maybe a little bit autistic, who are going to stay on one topic long enough to take it to fruition, right? You need
and beyond.
You need both. Yeah, you got to weaponize everyone's, strengths and weaknesses, and you got to know your own, right? You need to know when someone is talking to you, when they're voicing some aspect of their personality to you. You have to trust them enough to know that they're trying to help.
Yeah.
Right. When I'm presenting a new idea and people are throwing spears at it, it hurts. It activates my self-defense mechanisms. Oh my God, I'm under attack. They don't like my idea. And like in their mind, they're trying to help. They're trying to keep me from being embarrassed when I take it to the next boss, right?
Or help you develop it further or wherever.
And so along those lines, like phone a friend.
Yeah.
Before I go to a big boss, I need a couple of different people to look at my stuff. And I owe it to my boss, honestly, to have a couple different people look at my stuff. So I'm giving him or her the best product I can, the best advice I can as a staff guy.
And I think that's kind of the key in this whole episode is not really about understanding all of the different types or to like figure out exactly where you fit. It's just to understand that there are differences and figure out more or less where you fit, what your strengths are and what your limitations are, where are the gotchas. And like Jim said, know where to tap in, tap out, or at least know where to like lean in onto someone, like run it by them. Hey, this is how I want to approach this. Am I crazy? Like, does this sound right? It's part of maturity and growing up.
Yeah, and know how you're coming across. Like the thing you think is helpful, the other guy might be irritated with, right?
Yeah.
So for me, this comes down to being thoughtful about who you are in the moment and adjusting to meet that moment. There are times when the world needs you to step up and put on your ass-kicking pants. And there are times when maybe you need a downshift to keep your family from imploding. But if you're always in one mode or the other, you are probably not doing it right. And some people really struggle with that idea of adapting to the situation. But that also doesn't mean you should be fake, right? Or that you always have to like go along with every situation. You don't have to be a chameleon in every situation. Sometimes I need you to be the exact opposite. If everyone's going one way, maybe you need to go the opposite way, right?
Yeah, you bring something to the table you're part of the team for a reason.
Yeah.
You became that person for a reason.
but you should know who you are and know what that situation needs from you. So I challenge you, as your Jim, as we rattle off these archetypes and personalities and voices, don't just shrug and say, well, I'm an X. I'm a guardian or provider or whatever the hell Mike rattled off. No, you're not just an X. Today, you might need to be a Y or a Z or an ESTJ or a guardian or a communicator or a words of affirmation person or, touch or whatever the hell it is. Whatever. Okay? Like, I tend to want to be a creative type. I'm an ideas guy. I want to come up with a zillion ideas a second. But I found that in a lot of the teams I work in, they are full up weaponized ADHD and they're bouncing off the walls with different ideas. And I have to be kind of more the enforcer, trying to keep these other creative people on task long enough to get the project done. Right? So in that team, I have to be kind of the guy who's like, no, okay, here's the deadline. How are we getting there? And they're like, but I don't want a deadline. I want ideas. And it's like, where's that good idea fairy?
So this is an important thing that comes. So I encourage you to go on to the Five Voices website and take the little quiz. Mm-hmm. But this is one of the things that comes up in like the guardian voice. They talk about being like the due diligence and the risk averse, and just they're all about being efficient and being thorough and being like and getting things through the finish line, right? And I tend to be a more creative pioneer type, like Jim is describing, right? Where I'm like, no, but what about this? I want to be, and it's like the world is your oyster. I'm going to make it happen. And one of the interesting things that happen between those two types is my type of person tends to be less satisfied with like a 90% win. I'll focus on the 10% that didn't go well instead of appreciating the 90% that we did accomplish. And that's a perfect example of how like I need someone like that to keep me grounded and to keep me honest, right? Like, hey, we're still in a better spot than we were. Yeah, it's not like we're not there yet, but we're like doing pretty good.
Yeah. Almost all police encounters involve at least some level of leadership. You are influencing and directing a person in a way intended to win his cooperation. That is true on a traffic stop. That is true if you're interviewing a reluctant witness. That's true if you're training a, what is it called? OJT at
FTO?
FTO, if you're an FTO training a
new hire,
a newbie, right? That is true in a hostage. Yeah, a noob. That is true in a hostage standoff, right? We need leaders, not just robots. So if in this you're like, oh, I'm a warrior, like cool. I need you to also be all the other things too when the situation needs it, right?
And that's what I need people to understand about being dynamic.
Yeah,
is that being a leader is not just like a following a script. Like this is my one way of solving every problem. You have to have different ways of you need to be kind of a Swiss Army knife, right?
Yep.
And it doesn't mean that you have to be soft if your style is to always be firm and hard or whatever, strict, so to speak.
They have pills for that.
Yeah. But it does mean that you have to like be aware enough to know, all right, this is a little outside of my wheelhouse. So maybe I can either pass this off or approach it a different way. Like there's got to be another way. Like you have to be adaptive and self-aware. I think that's all I got, Jim.
Yeah. Be safe out there. Be smart out there.
And don't forget that you have a choice.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show. So when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters. That's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.